Mathilda Weasley. When you think of the Weasleys, you think of a house bursting with children, hand-me-down robes, and chaos as a lifestyle. But the earliest Weasley we can actually put a name to was nothing like that. Mathilda Weasley served as Professor of Transfiguration and Deputy Headmistress at Hogwarts, working directly under Phineas Nigellus Black. Yes, the same Phineas Nigellus who held the title of least popular headmaster in the school's history. Before Hogwarts, though, Mathilda traveled the world as a curse breaker for the Ministry of Magic. Ancient tombs, magical wards, the kind of work that gets you killed if you sneeze at the wrong moment. Turns out the Weasley tradition of walking into ridiculously dangerous situations and somehow walking back out started a full century before Bill took a similar job at Gringotts. She married a fellow curse breaker named Paul, though the marriage didn't last. They separated and Mathilda had no children. The family line continued through her brothers. But the appetite for danger, well, that stuck with the family name. And the next one to prove it was Gareth Weasley, Mathilda's nephew, a fifth-year Gryffindor in the 1890s, and the first Weasley who saw school rules as entertainment. Gareth was obsessed with potion making, specifically the kind that isn't in any textbook. He invented his own brews, tested them on family members, and drove his father mad in the process. His aunt Mathilda spent half her time as deputy headmistress just keeping him from blowing up the potions classroom. Where Mathilda gave the Weasley name its tradition of courage, Gareth gave it something equally important. The tradition of creative chaos. Fred and George would perfect that philosophy a century later, but Gareth got there first. Now, a few generations later, one Weasley made a choice that shook a very different family tree. His name was Septimus Weasley. Born around the 1910s, Ron's grandfather and the man who permanently attached the words blood traitor to the Weasley name. He married Cedrella Black, great aunt to Sirius. She grew up inside one of the most obsessively pure blood households in Wizarding Britain, and then chose a Weasley. Her family responded the way they always did, burned her name off the tapestry. So, blood traitor meant they rejected the idea of pure blood supremacy, openly embracing their ties to muggles, and never acting as if their bloodline made them better than anyone else. They had at least 3 sons, including Arthur, who inherited the attitude wholesale. Through this marriage, black blood ended up running through a family that wore the label like a badge. Fun fact, Septimus is most likely the grandfather whose old wizard chess set ended up with Ron, the same set that won the most important chess game in Hogwarts history. Not bad for a hand-me-down. One of Septimus's sons took the family legacy in a very different direction. Billas Weasley, Ron's uncle, the family bachelor, and the Weasley who proved you don't need children to leave a legacy. He never married, never settled down, and had zero interest in either. What Billas had was personality. The man drank an entire bottle of fire whiskey, lifted his robes, and started pulling out bouquets of flowers. He also saw the Grim, the Wizarding world's omen of death, and died within 24 hours. And the family turned the story into one of its darker legends. Billas gave the family 2 things. First, a name. Ron carries it as his middle name, Ronald Billas Weasley, right there on every howler and every ministry document. And second, a reputation. The idea that a Weasley can be fearless, reckless, absolutely ridiculous, and still be someone worth naming your son after. But while Billas lived loud and fast, his brother built something that would last for generations. Arthur Weasley, head of a family of 9, ministry employee on a salary that barely covered school supplies, and the most enthusiastic Muggle fan the Wizarding world has ever seen. He took a job at the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, the least prestigious department the ministry had to offer, and loved every second of it. Where other pureblood families locked their doors to the Muggle world, Arthur left his wide open and installed a garage. Here's the thing about Arthur. He built the Burrow, the crooked, chaotic, magically held together house that became the emotional center of the entire Harry Potter story. Every Christmas, every summer, every moment Harry needed a family. The Burrow. Arthur and Molly made that. And then 7 children, 7 Gryffindors, a curse breaker, a dragon tamer, a ministry official, 2 inventors, a war hero, and the very first Weasley daughter born in living memory. Arthur gave the Wizarding world an entire generation of Weasleys, all raised on the same principle: people matter more than blood. But before the children, there was Molly, and she deserves her own chapter. Molly Weasley, née Pruitt, born 30th of October 1949, the woman who raised an entire household through love, discipline, and sheer force of will. She came from the Pruitt family, pure blood, respected and included in the Sacred 28. Her brothers Fabian and Gideon both died fighting Death Eaters in the First Wizarding War. Molly carried that loss quietly for the rest of her life, and it shaped everything she did after. She met Arthur at Hogwarts, both Gryffindor, both trouble. One night they snuck out after curfew together. Arthur got caught by the caretaker and caned hard enough to carry the marks for the rest of his life. And Molly slipped back into Gryffindor Tower at 4 in the morning completely undetected. Sounds about right for those two. Here's what Molly Weasley actually was. She raised 7 children on a ministry salary that had no business stretching that far. And every single one of them came out brave, loyal, and slightly unhinged, which for a Weasley is the goal. The clock on the wall that tracked every family member's location. The howlers that could reduce a teenager to ashes across 3 countries. Pure Molly. And then there's the sweaters, every Christmas hand-knitted, personalized, one for each child, and one for Harry. The moment Harry received a Weasley sweater, Molly had already folded him into the family. Most fans remember her for one line, "Not my daughter, you bitch," aimed at Bellatrix Lestrange, seconds before ending her. But Molly had been fighting for her family long before that duel. Every meal, every sweater, every howler, all of it was combat. Her eldest son inherited her stubbornness. Bill Weasley, the eldest of 7, and then he dropped all of it to crawl through cursed Egyptian tombs for Gringotts. A century earlier, his great-great-aunt Mathilda had done the same work for the ministry. The Weasley curse-breaking gene skipped a few generations and landed right back where it started. But here's the part that actually reshaped the family. Bill married Fleur Delacour, French, part villa, glamorous. The exact opposite of everything the Burrow represented. Molly fought it. Fleur stayed anyway, especially after Greyback scarred Bill's face during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. She made it clear she didn't care what he looked like. Wedding happened and Molly came around. With Fleur, Bill gave the Weasley bloodline something it had never had, an international branch. After 7 centuries of pure-blood British stubbornness, the Weasleys finally went European. They had 3 children, Dominique, Louis, and Victoire, who would one day be caught kissing a Lupin on platform 9 3/4. Bill's younger brother wanted nothing to do with offices, banks, or England. He wanted dragons. Charlie Weasley, second eldest, stocky, covered in burns, and the only Weasley who was offered a career in professional Quidditch and said no. He was good enough to play for England. Oliver Wood said so himself. Charlie chose dragons instead, moved to Romania to study them at a reserve, and never came back. Here's why that matters for the actual story. When Hagrid hatched an illegal Norwegian ridgeback in his wooden hut, because of course he did, it was Charlie's friends who flew down and smuggled the dragon out. Without that Romanian connection, Norbert stays at Hogwarts. Hagrid gets arrested, and Harry's first year goes very differently. Charlie also brought reinforcements to the Battle of Hogwarts. Foreign wizards recruited through his contacts abroad. He never married, never had children, basically the Weasley's family cool uncle who shows up smelling like a bonfire and has better stories than everyone else at the table combined. His younger brother took the opposite path entirely. Percy Weasley, 3rd eldest, prefect, head boy, and the Weasley who ironed his socks. He climbed the ministry ladder faster than anyone expected, junior assistant to the minister himself by his early 20s. Impressive, until you realize the ministry promoted him specifically to spy on his own father. Percy either didn't see it or didn't want to. When Arthur tried to warn him, Percy chose the ministry. He sent back his Weasley sweater, called his father an embarrassment, and walked out. Molly couldn't talk about him without crying. For 2 years, his chair at the Burrow sat empty. Most fans remember what he did wrong. Here's what he did right. He came back, walked into the Battle of Hogwarts, apologized to his family in the middle of a war zone, and fought beside them. He was standing next to Fred when it happened. One moment they were laughing together, the next, Fred was gone. After the war, he married Audrey, had 2 daughters, Molly and Lucy, and spent the rest of his career quietly making the ministry better from the inside. The prodigal Weasley finally home. The brother who made him laugh one last time deserves everything that comes next. Fred Weasley, one half of the most dangerous duo Hogwarts had seen since the Marauders, and the Weasley who proved that chaos can be a business model. Fred and George stole the Marauders map from Filch's office in their first year. They were 11. The map had been confiscated decades earlier, sitting in a drawer waiting for someone reckless enough to take it. 2 11-year-old Weasleys qualified perfectly. They used it for years before handing it to Harry, who arguably needed it more. But the real legacy was Weasley's Wizard Wheezies. Fred and George built a joke shop in the middle of a war. Skeeving snack boxes, extendable ears, Peruvian instant darkness powder. Half their inventory doubled as resistance tools. They funded it with Harry's Triwizard winnings and turned 93 Diagon Alley into the brightest shop front on the street, while Death Eaters darkened everything around it. Fred died at the Battle of Hogwarts. The shop stayed open and someone had to run it alone. George Weasley, the twin who stayed, had already lost an ear during the Battle of the 7 Potters. Cursed off by Snape's Sectum Sempra meant for a Death Eater. After the war, George reopened Weasley's Wizard Wheezies and ran it himself. Every product on the shelf, every invention in the back room. Half of it still had Fred's handwriting on the prototypes. He kept going. He married Angelina Johnson, who had gone to the Yule Ball with Fred. Some fans find that strange. Others think Fred would have found it perfect. They had 2 children, the first a son he named Fred. Basically, George took the worst thing that could happen to a twin and turned it into a life that honored everything they'd built together. The laughter stayed in the family, it just got a little quieter. And then there was Ron Weasley. 6th of 7, hand-me-down everything, and the reason Harry Potter survived long enough to save the wizarding world. Every Weasley before him had something that made them stand out. Bill was the cool one, Charlie was the tough one, Percy was the smart one, Fred and George were the loud ones. Ron grew up at the bottom of that list, wearing Charlie's old robes and carrying a broken wand he was too embarrassed to replace. His entire childhood was other people's leftovers. Ron sat down next to a skinny kid on the Hogwarts Express who had no friends, no family, and no idea how the wizarding world worked. Then Ron pulled out his corned beef sandwiches, complained about them, and that was enough. Harry bought the entire trolley and shared it all with the first person who'd ever just sat with him. That was the moment Harry Potter gained access to the Weasleys. Every Christmas at the Burrow, every Molly sweater, every Arthur question about rubber ducks. All of it traces back to 2 kids splitting sweets on a train. His strategic mind won the chess game that got Harry past Dumbledore's protections in their first year, on his grandfather's old set. He destroyed a Horcrux. He came back after walking away, which is harder than never leaving. After the war, he married Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, the person who'd kept all 3 of them alive through most of it. The wedding was, by all accounts, eventful. Ron got so nervous he spent most of the ceremony fairly drunk, answered, "I think I do," when asked if he'd take her as his wife, and remembered very little of it afterwards. Hermione married him anyway. Together they had 2 children, Rose and Hugo Granger Weasley. So Ron gave Harry a family, then he built one of his own. But Ron wasn't the last Weasley to leave a mark on Harry's story. Ginny Weasley, the 7th child, the first daughter in generations, and the Weasley who stared down Voldemort before she turned 12. In a family full of brothers who defined themselves by being loud, brave, or brilliant, Ginny spent her early years being overlooked, the quiet little sister. Then her first year at Hogwarts happened. Tom Riddle's diary got inside her head and used her to open the Chamber of Secrets, and nearly drained her life to bring himself back. She was 11. Most grown wizards never face anything close to that. Ginny survived it and came out the other side absolutely furious. That fury became her signature. She was the best flyer in the family, yes, better than Charlie. And the Bat Bogey hex she threw was famous enough to earn her an invitation to the Slug Club. She joined Dumbledore's army, fought at the Department of Mysteries, fought at the Battle of Hogwarts, and eventually went professional with the Holyhead Harpies. And then she married Harry Potter. The Weasley and Potter lines merged, and 3 children followed: James Sirius, Albus Severus, and Lily Luna. 7 centuries of Weasley history, and it led straight to a Potter. But Ginny wasn't the last Weasley to carry the family forward. The next chapter belongs to a name that was already gone and came back: Fred Weasley II. George's firstborn. He was born in 2008, a decade after the battle. George could have named his son anything, but he chose Fred, the name that meant everything and cost everything. Hogwarts, Gryffindor, Quidditch, all expected. What hit harder was the position. Fred II became a beater, the same position Fred and George had played together, side by side, for years. The same role that had made them legendary on the pitch. George once had a twin beside him swinging at bludgers. Now his son was doing it in his place. The Weasley's name kept growing, and Ron's eldest daughter would carry it into a combination the wizarding world had never seen. Rose Granger Weasley, Ron and Hermione's eldest, and the first person in history to carry both names at once. A pure-blood family that spent generations being labeled blood traitors, and now the name itself has a Muggle-born surname fused right into it. Rose made the Gryffindor Quidditch team as a chaser in her 2nd year. Her broomstick obeyed on the first command, something Hermione's famously never did. The intelligence came from Granger. The Quidditch came from Weasley. The combination was exactly what both names deserved. She has a younger brother, Hugo. Together they represent something the Sacred 28 would have found unthinkable: a Weasley generation that carries Muggle-born heritage in its name and considers it a point of pride. The Weasley story started with a curse breaker who had no children. It ended with a family so large, so loud, and so stubbornly good that the wizarding world couldn't function without them. Okay, the Weasleys gave Harry a family, a home, and eventually a wife. But the Potters had their own story long before a skinny kid showed up at the Burrow. The lives of all 11 Potters in Harry Potter Explained in detail. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before Molly sends you a howler for skipping class.